But I am very honored and pleased to introduce our next presenter, Christian Fierro, a first-time presenter at AuggieCon. Christian is a civil 3D consultant. His presentation for us today is called Mastering AutoCAD Blocks Efficiency at Your Fingertips. So Christian, welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Christina. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to talk over one of my favorite subjects today is AutoCAD blocks. So without further ado, let us begin. So for the title, saying Mastering AutoCAD Blocks at Your Fingertips, could be a little bit far-fetched, for mastering, but in order to master something, you have to at least have a understanding of the basics and the fundamentals, at least for knowing what questions to ask. So my name is Christian Fierro, and I love AutoCAD. I love Civil 3D. I love talking everything about it. One of my favorite subjects, again, is talking about AutoCAD blocks. So for today, some high-level topics that we're going to cover today is what it looks like when creating blocks and what standards that we can consider when creating those, and an overview of those settings. We'll look at static blocks, dynamic blocks, and groups. We'll look at the overview of what dynamic properties are, meaning what makes a dynamic block, how to simplify dynamic blocks with static blocks. An awesome feature that has not been discussed too much is smart blocks with AI. Using static blocks strategically with dynamic blocks. We'll cover what by block and by layer is as defined in your properties panel. And we'll look at what drawing insertion units mean for us. And we'll look at a centralized block library approach. And we'll see some examples of how to add blocks to a tool palette and to insert blocks into your drawing by your tool palette as well. And we'll also look at some examples of inserting blocks through your CUI. Now, everyone loves PowerPoints. So what I'm going to do is we're going to have a subtle PowerPoint today, just to kind of show some high-level approaches of some of the topics. And we're going to do most of the presentation today in AutoCAD. Now, the most important subject here is block standards. Now, what does standards really mean, right? It's a unique approach of how us as a company goes about something. Everything should be intentional, right? If we're kind of doing something random at the fly of our pants every single time, we're creating inconsistencies on a daily basis. That adds up over time, and it definitely makes it difficult to replicate. So first thing is name formatting for blocks, as you can see in this example here. Again, this is just an example. You don't have to follow this, but you can kind of look at it as main category and then having these separations here, just so we don't have any spaces in between our naming for it, to main category, to subcategory. Let's say main category can be defined as your drawing name. So let's say it's utility drawing to, let's say your subcategory could be storm, and then main description could be a reinforced concrete pipe, and then let's say subdescription could be something different. So we can kind of look at different ways of naming to where the end user knows exactly what this block is. Next is defining a base point intentionally. So one thing to look at is mtext. Everyone knows what justification means, right? And whenever we're incorporating certain features for our mtext and for our text, it's very important of how it's justified. Blocks is the same exact way. Base point equals justification. Next is defining units. Units is very important, right? Sometimes we're not living in this imaginary world of, one equals nothing, right? One equals something. So defining our units inside of our block is very important. We'll look at some examples of what does a unit difference look like. Now, this is very important when we're looking at using XREFs. So we'll make that connection into here of how it automatically translates by how the settings was created by its unit type. We'll look at selecting objects, different ways of doing that, overview on behavior, what does that mean, overview on the properties of said block by the properties panel. We'll look at defining content properties, so meaning we'll explore the XREF, label type, and object style on a very high level approach, and you'll see they react the same way as a block does. So what you can take away from here is a broad connection of object styles, label styles, and XREF use. We'll also look at to retain, convert, or delete, and when to use those, and always add the description to finalize blocks. In case your name isn't very descriptive, we can add a description to further, convey what this block functionality is. Now we have two major type of blocks, static blocks and dynamic blocks. We're going to be looking over static blocks. So we can simply define a block by a consolidation of objects, as these types of blocks do not have anything fancy about them. There are some not so basic information that can be further understood about these. As you can see from my left side here example, on the left side, we have a dynamic property set. So really all that means is whenever I created this block, same exact object, nothing fancy about it at all. I just added in a dynamic property. I just added in a flip component to here. And as soon as I created that, it then created a lightning bolt symbol to it. So one way that I can differentiate between a static block and a dynamic block by my naming convention is maybe this is called rectangle block, right? And I can have rectangle underscore dynamic tells the user this is a dynamic block, and I can just have rectangle underscore standard, and it just tells the user that it's a static block. So this is the major difference of static and dynamic. Now, dynamic blocks, what does this really mean? Dynamic blocks are a powerful feature in AutoCAD that enable the creation of intelligent, flexible block definitions that can drastically reduce redundancy and improve drafting efficiency by allowing a single block to serve multiple purposes. With dynamic blocks, you can, but remember, you're not limited to, combine multiple variations of a block into a single definition. So think of, you have 5 types of blocks. You can throw it all into one block, and then you can cycle it using a visibility state parameter. You can automatically stretch, move, scale, and rotate geometry, add parametric constraints for smarter behavior, use attribute definitions to tie in dynamic properties. So this is your, so think of using an mtext or text inside of a block as a standard. So that's what an attribute definition is. It's just a block version of a text object. Apply property classifications for organized data handling. So you can add on additional user-defined properties in your block that you can later reference to by fields is a great use, and other sorts, other ways as well. You can also create lookup tables if there's any Excel power users out there to switch between sets of dynamic properties and apply changes automatically. So what that means is you can associate a certain value by a defined property to another, and whenever it's put into a position, it will automatically reference said property. Now, block library is very important. So here's some funny things that we can kind of all think back on and probably say we've done this too, or at least a couple times. Every company that uses AutoCAD has some sort of way of organizing blocks. I would assume a lot of companies rely on pulling blocks from a project to project and copy and pasting as needed. So whoever has done that went into a previous project, because however they created that block, it works phenomenal, and we just have to replicate it. So we're just constantly pulling it in, putting it in here, and that's sometimes is the best way about it. What is some ways to improve this? Could it be putting it all in one template? So think of your starting template. You can throw every single block imaginable you have into there, and it's at your disposal. That could be a way. Could it be writing out blocks one at a time using the W block command, and then pulling it in from a metadata, from metadata from your block library, we could do that as well. While all of these are proper workflows, we can further explore the use of tool palettes and customized user interface workflows. If you have an idea of coding Lisp routines, scripts, and Dynamo, and some help from ChatGPT, and they're not sponsoring this, that's why I put that on there. We can automate some very typical workflows and pull all of our blocks from a given centralized location. If there is any changes to any blocks, you will be using the most up-to-date version of every single time. So rather than going into each project, pulling it in, we can create a set of standards of creating a centralized library approach and then pulling it in directly. Now, how does AutoCAD make that connection? Here's a fun tip. And you all can practice this on your command line as we go through this. Use the command insert content and see what it asks you. It asks to apply the file path, the directory, and block name. So it's asking you your external path. You fill that in to your the origin of your block library drawing, and then you tell its block name. That's how it makes the connection. Not very complicated, right? You can also set your support folder, so this is inside of your options, to the drawing location, and then you can use the command -insert, and then you can just type in the block name from there, and that will make the connection automatically. So that's some fun tips that you can look at when using blocks. Now, for the block conclusion, AutoCAD's getting smarter, and so should we. New features hit all the time, but most of them aren't reinventing the wheel. They're building on tools we already use. Think object styles, label styles, XREFs, blocks, annotation objects. They all follow the same playbook when it comes to color, layer, and style control. If you know how to manage one, you're already set to handle the others. The trick is to connect the dots fast, so you're not relearning the same logic over and over. That's how you stay efficient when the software moves forward. So thank you everyone for my PowerPoint slide. Now let's begin the real fun inside of AutoCAD. So for a block overview, I have 3 different drawings that we're going to be looking through. I have creating blocks overview, a smart block example. This is for using the AI, and this is an idea of a block library. And for our tool palette and our CUI, I created a one just for today, AugiCon 25. We have these here. This is a command. Here's 2 different buttons that inserts in a block at a given coordinates. Here's one that defines the tool palette path, open, close, and this changes some drawing settings. So while I'm going through the motions here of using this, I'll periodically go through here and then I will click on these buttons. So that's what their function is. If I go to tool palettes here, I have a block palette set and I have clock digital and I have all the other corresponding blocks that will be helping us make these connections for today's presentation. So the very first thing to do is creating a block, and really how complicated can that be, right? So let's look at creating a simple block. Now, first thing we have to do is tell AutoCAD which type of elements or which type of objects we would like to use to create our block. First thing, we can either select everything, or we can not select anything and we can press block or type in B and go to our block creation tool. And then I'm going to call this, let's say, test block. Now, if we have a quick overview of all the current blocks inside of my drawing, if I do this drop down here, so everyone sees there is a method to the madness, and we can easily identify some objects that are kind of out of place. So let's say we have testing, we have rectangle, right? We can obviously see those are out of place and there's no format to them whatsoever. So majority of my blocks naming format is covering what exactly their purpose is in my drawing. So for this example, we're just going to call this test and creating block. So this is my intention. I'm creating a block. That's a subcategory of, let's say, a test, right? It would be like my main category. So that's how I'm mentally breaking this down. Now we look at a base point. Okay, well, base point could be anywhere. Automatically, it defines it as XYZ on based of our origin coordinates here. Now, just know whenever we end up creating a block, it's creating its own origin coordinate system, essentially, inside of the block itself. So that's very important to consider. So everything is relative based off of this coordinate plane. So if I go to here, and if I select my XYZ 4, I'll just pick my point, and I'll just use the center of this block here. You can see everything automatically changes by this approach. Now my settings, I would like my block to be set into feet. Most people don't really see this. It's always kind of default to unitless or feet, and it's something that's never really explored on. Now, where this can be further explored on is think of a civil firm that is using their drawings within feet. Then we also have an architect. Their drawings are in inches. So we can create a block in inches, and then whenever we insert it as a inches block unit into a drawing that has feet set, it will make that conversion automatically. So you don't have to explode it, and then you have to then rescale it accordingly. So it makes the conversion from inches to feet, feet to inches, and whatever units that are defined afterwards. Now going into the objects here, we have retain, convert, and delete. If I retain the block, the circle and the hatches will automatically be, they will stay here, but the block will be created in the background. Convert to block, all of the objects that we selected will convert itself to the block and they will disappear. If we go to delete, it will delete all of these elements, and then we could then the block is still created in the background. So for this example, I'm just going to go to convert to block. Now behavior blocks, same thing for annotative text, or for text can be annotative. This is how you can apply your scale factor at a given annotative scale. So if I look at annotative and I look to my bottom of my screen, I see currently my model space is dictated as 1 inch equals 10 feet. So whenever I create this block, it will then take my current annotation scale and apply it to the block. So whenever I then apply this block at 1 inch equals 20 feet, 10, 30, or 40, or whatever, and if I use this either in a drawing or by an XREF, it will automatically apply that given annotative scale. So keep that in mind whenever you have this cycled on. So whenever you're using a block and it keeps changing sizes in your viewports, this is a good way to investigate on the behavior of said block. Now looking at allow exploding. We love exploding. I think everyone is whoever first learns AutoCAD learns how to explode things, right? Really simplifies things. Not the best answer, but always be intentional of, I want someone to explode this, or I don't want someone to explode this. So always check this and uncheck it as needed. And then I can now add my description. I'll say, this is my test. And now I can select my objects, window all of them, enter, and then I'll press OK. Now, let's say if I messed up on any of those properties there, I can just go inside of my block properties, my block editor, and on the right side of my properties panel, I can go to my block and I could change annotative yes, no, match orientation to layout. I'll say no for here. Scale uniformly, yes. Allow exploding, yes. Units specified in feet and so on. So I can adjust my description as well. So in case you messed up, you don't have to explode it and then recreate the block. Now let's explore units and why it's important and why it could become very frustrating. So for this example, we have my default radius set for about 12 feet here. And I have these different variation of colors just so we can kind of flip between the x-axis and the y-axis so we can just see how they flip. So if we look under here, if I first go to my units in my drawing, I can type in units, takes me to my drawing units, and my insertion scale is defined under feet at the moment. So if I select this one on the right side of my properties panel, my block unit is set into feet. My block inches is set to inches here, and my block unitless is set to unitless. So if I look under here, notice the unit factor. This is very important. At the moment, there is only the unit factor is ×1. If I go to my inches, my unit factor is now at 0.08333. And if I go to my block unitless, because I created my unitless in a feet setting, it's now set for 1. Now notice what happens when I select all of it. My scale X, so my overall scale uniformity, is set to 1. Now notice when I cycle my drawing settings from feet to inches, nothing happens, right? Well, this is, again, AutoCAD assuming, that's what you wanted to do. So now what happens when I select all of my blocks? Now I have a scale X varies. So when I now go to my block, feet, it automatically applied the scale factor of 0.08333 now. And now my block inches is now at the given 1. So now once I go here to select all my objects, and I'll put my scale X to 1, now everyone sees the potential chaos this could create if we're not being intentional of completely defining what our units is set for. Yes, Matt. I see your hands up. Is there some people's hands up that would like to talk? Okay. All right, so we'll carry on, and then towards the end, I think we have some openings for some time for any questions. So now let me just go over here and then rebalance this chaos out. I'll go back to setting my insertion units for feet, select all my objects, and then now I'll go to my scale X, which was defined for 1. So we can see this went to its inches size divided by 12, and this stayed consistent of how we created it. Now let's look at static versus dynamic. So that's an overview of be intentional of what units you're prescribing your blocks to be in, and whenever you're using XREFs too, and we'll get to that shortly. So if we come to here to static versus dynamic, this is a static block and this is a dynamic block. Now, one thing that I added to this dynamic block itself was flipping. So based off of my insertion point or my base point for this specific block is in the center, and we have different flip parameters that covers the x-axis and the y-axis. So we can come to here and then use this and then cycle this way. And notice I get the same exact results of coming into here and then changing my block editor. And if I see the scale uniformly here, I want to say no, so I can manually adjust my x-axis and my y-axis. And remember, this is solely based off of my base point. So if I come to here, I can go to my scale X and type in negative Y, or for -1, and my scale Y can be -1. And I make the same exact changes here. So the only difference is, let's say if I go to my block here, and let me just change my base point real quick. So I'll change my insertion point, let's say over here. So if I come to here, now my base point is somewhere completely different, but my mirror or my flip parameters operate the same way. But if I come here and if I change my base point, now my scale, my flip parameter for my static block will now rotate based off of this this origin point. So this is solely based off of my base point. My rotation will be effective. My scale factor will be affected as well, and also how this mirrors to each other. So that's some very important things to note whenever you are creating any sort of blocks. Now we can look at some other examples of different ways of having a scale factor or a different base point and how that could look like. So if we come to here, and if I select all of these same exact blocks, but at different parameters, we can apply -1, and we can see where everything kind of potentially can mess up at, right? We can come here, change the rotation to here. So the base point is extremely useful when used correctly. Now, another favorite of mine is looking at by layer versus by block XREF approaches. Let's see. Let's go back to here to the, okay. Now, if we go to here and let's correct this. So we have by block, by layer. These are just single contents. If I go to my block editor, it's just a circle that's defined under a by block properties panel here. Let me close this out and go to a by layer set block. And this was built on my contents. Again, whenever we created this block, my contents were very intentional. My color is set to by layer, line type by layer, line weight by layer, and then my transparency, I can type into by layer as well. Then I can go to close. So now notice what difference this gives me whenever I start changing properties to it. So let me cycle to red. Now notice the by block takes on that property because the contents is saying, hey, whatever property is associated to that block, by block, it will change based off of that, right? This one's saying, well, I don't really know what that means. I'm only looking at the by layer changes. So we'll accommodate this block, and then we'll go to, let's say, my green layer. Now notice this one is overridden because it's saying, yes, I can still use your layer color because my property palette currently is set to by layer. But then once I go back to red, it makes that override because the contents of the block allows it to. Now let's go into something else. And let's say we have a lot of, different types of blocks where it has multiple blocks living inside of it. We can still have that same level of thinking. So this example, I have two separate blocks inside of here. The contents of this block property is associated to my is associated to by block, and my text is associated to by block too. Now, I can still apply this to a by layer to green to where, let's say, if I wanted to freeze a layer green or whatever the case is, I can still isolate this object because of it. So whenever you have blocks and there's multiple layers living inside of your block for a reason, but you only want one overall color for the base or for the final block property, which would be here, it's important that it's set to a by block all across the board. Now I can still come to here and I can have my red, I can change this to whatever I want, and I can associate this to a completely different type of properties for it as well. And I can still go to my layer list and I can go to green and I could then freeze green and then it goes away. So I can kind of get best of both worlds if done intentionally. So now same thing with the by layer approach. I can come to here and I could apply these to different layers. And notice this is the only one that changes. Now, I mentioned before, I mentioned how the heck does this even relate to using label styles and object styles, right? Well, this is a label style. Here, this is a general note label, very simple. And I created the components of here the exact same way. My properties panel here is just in a different fashion, is all set to by block, drag state, by block, and by block. Now, whenever I have this associated to a specific layer, let's say to green, to by layer, it changes that automatically. And let's say I'll call this one to green as well. Perfect. And we'll select all these to green. So let's say in our given condition where this is relatable to most people is making a correction or making a revision or calling out as built or something like that. And we have one set of label styles. Now, you could create an additional label style that tells you to go to this color, whatever. Or I can create one, I can structure it in a specific format, and then I can flip it by applying simple overrides, especially if it's just a temporary, add-on. I can come here to change my color. Check that out. Now it's red under the same exact layer. No changes were made, but adjusting the properties here. Now let's look at a combination of both. Now you guys can probably tell based off of my properties panel, and you guys can diagnose or troubleshoot future projects that you guys have when you're associating an object to a layer and to a true color, and you're getting different colors. This is what it looks like by having a by block components mixed with the green being shown as by layer. So there's some intentional thinking that we can go about with creating these. Now, let's look at a awesome feature, which I like to call it smart block. So if we come to here, and if we type in our command line, b convert, we have two different ones, dash b convert or b convert, which is block convert. I created a little button to help me out because, typing takes a long time. So my conditions is I got this from an architect, and there's just a lot of line work in here, and I would like for this to be a little bit easier for me to manage, right? I would like all my geometry chairs to be a block and not just loose line work. So how can we do that? Well, I can either come to here, and let's think of different ways of going about this. If I go to copy, I can either come here, I can type in group, which creates a temporary block approach, and I could replace every single one. That sounds like a lot of work to me. So I can also go into the approach of creating this as a block and then going through here and changing that. All those workflows I'm not really feeling like doing, so I can use this was released sometime last year. If I go to my B convert, I could then select, let's say, this chair, and notice what it does. It makes the connection of every single geometry that shares the same exact highlighted objects. If I go to here, I now see every single chair element that it associates itself to. Next, what we can do is we can go to convert. And then I'm going to be creating a new block. This is my test chair, still having intentional name formatting, even though it's a test. And for my base point, I'm going to use as my geometry center. So as you noticed, whenever I created my group, it gave me a geometry center of all of my objects. So my geometry center will most likely be somewhere right here in the middle. So I'm going to use this as my base point, and then I'm going to go to assign layer, and let's say I'm going to assign this to a chairs layer. And then I can go to convert. Now I have 66 block references at my defined layer. And I can go through this entire thing, and then I can do the same thing with doors. I could do really pretty much anything with it. So that's the power of using new AI capabilities for AutoCAD. And that can save people a lot of time. Now, next thing we're going to talk about is our centralized library approach for creating tool palettes and our customized user interface. So for this example, we're going to look at have our tool palettes open for us, and I will create a brand new drawing. I'll type in new. I'll go over here, open with no template, so no one knows that I'm cheating here. Now, my goal is to create a block library to where it is very sustainable for me to make changes, for me to, let's say, remove, in a format to where I don't have to open up a lot of drawings to do so. So now notice when I go to rename, I have this block that obviously doesn't belong here, but we have our analog base, analog dynamic, digital, hour, minutes, and seconds. So I kind of went through and I organized this based on its purpose. Now we always see examples of how to apply this in a real world scenario. Now this example, we're going to look through what it looks like creating a clock, right? And we can apply some different block attributes to here, just so you guys can kind of get the idea in a different fashion. So looking at here, we have clock seconds, and remember the name is very, very important on here. We have our clock minute, our clock hour, and we have our clock analog base. And on here, we already have some different dynamic properties set, and then I'll show you some caveats of using blocks and using loose line work inside of dynamic blocks. So if I go to here, I can now change something based off of here. Again, very, very simple, nothing too complicated. Now, let me just copy this down to here. And let's say what I would like to do, I'll just zero all these out real quick. Let's say what I want to do is make any changes to my dynamic block. So let's say whenever I first created this here, let's say we're going to go to no, I'll put this to my test change block. So going inside of here, I have all of my different components already set. So I have my block reference for here, and I have all these different block objects. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a block that has just loose line work inside of here, which is common in most blocks. So this is the approach of creating a dynamic blocks with static blocks and why that's beneficial. So if I come to here, right now it's just a static block, nothing inside of it besides another block as the reference and some loose polylines. So I can come in here and quickly I can apply some parameters to it. I'm going to set my center into here and then go to my hours. And then I can name, this is the same thing with name formatting. I can go to here and I could say hours, let's say hours hand, go back to my rotation, and I can apply it another one to my minutes, my minutes hand. And then I can apply my third one to my seconds. Seconds hand. Now I need to give it an action. So I'm giving the initial guideline of, I would like to rotate based off of this parameter here. But AutoCAD doesn't have that connection, so you need to make that connection. That's where the action comes into place. So if we come to here to apply our rotate action by our rotate parameter, we can now select the object. Now we're making the AutoCAD connection right now. So we're selecting this as our object, press OK. Now it given us this here, and it highlights the corresponding parameter and our object. Now we're going to go to our minutes in hand and do the same exact way. Apply, OK, and then do the same one for our seconds. So now this is good. It should behave the exact same way as our other dynamic block that was just created with static blocks. Now, let me show you the difference of why this is better creating dynamic blocks with static blocks, such as here, rather than creating dynamic blocks with loose line work, such as here. I can go inside of my block reference here, let's say my clock hour, and I have some final products that I'll kind of show you guys that we can kind of make that switch here. So let's say we're going to go here and we're going to edit this. I want to make this to a color yellow, and I want to change the global width to a 0.1. Now notice the change already taken effect in my dynamic block. I didn't have to make any effort into changing it whatsoever. But notice the one with the loose line work, I'm going to have to do something a little bit extra. I'm going to have to go inside of my block reference here, and then either I can change this directly. It's either 0.1 to green, or let's say if I was using something a bit more complicated to where it forced me to remove that object, and then I would have to then import something new here. Notice it doesn't have that same connection. So you see this rotation parameter just all by itself now, because it has no idea it's linked to this here. So I have to ensure that I have to remodify my hours here, or my specific line work that I adjusted. Now it makes that connection by here. So we can save our time drastically by simply having static blocks and dynamic blocks, because whenever we create our dynamic properties, it makes the association to that defined object. And you, as a user, define what object it really is calling for. So let's make a very quick conversion here. I'm going to close this out. And let's see some examples of importing some of those from our library. So I'll go into here. Oh, this is my, open something up new here real quick. So I'm going to go to my palettes, and I'm going to come here to my digital. And notice I created something cool here. It tells me the exact time based on where I'm from here. So it was an updated digital clock that tells me the exact time of today's session. And we can go into our clock analog dynamic, pulls it directly from the tool palette. And notice when I go into the properties here, it's showing based off of my source file. So it's all coming out from my source file to my block library drawing and my clock analog dynamic block name. So that's where it's making the connection to. Now I can go through here and then I can change all this stuff accordingly. So now all these drawings, all these products here are now localized. Now I can go to my CUI and I can insert in the same items. So I'm going to do zoom extends. Nothing's in my drawing here. We're going to go to insert analog clock. And now we have analog clock, insert digital clock. Now we have our digital clock defined at a specific coordinate system. All this is, or at a, yes, all this is pulled in directly from a block library. Now, I'm just going to do something very simple. I'm going to change, I'm going to just swap a drawing, and then you will see everything automatically makes the connection for us. My content, and then I'm going to change my block library drawing name, file name to other, and then my other block library name to this connection. And now notice the difference it comes into. One moment. Let's go to here. Let's look at our block library. Perfect. Now, this is my new block library drawing. And when I go inside of a new drawing here, now the reason why I went to the other one was because I need to redefine it. So going into here, I have my clock digital, which is the same one. I have my new analog dynamic, which automatically updated to something a bit more fancier. And now I can go open up a new drawing and go to my CUI. And now I can pull in my new blocks that I created here. Now let's just make a very simple change for here. I'm going to go into my block library here. And then all I'm going to do is go to my block editor. I'll go to, let's say, I'm going to change all of this to a different color. Let's say alter red. I'll press OK. I'll save. I'll go into a new drawing, take everything out of here, and then I'll purge out all my blocks. And now I will then access my clock digital. Now I'm getting that change every single time, as long as I'm changing it in the source file and then saving it. And then the last thing is confirming that it changes in my CUI. Come back into here. And then I have an ongoing change every time. Now, the easiest way to create these tool palettes and our blocks in our tool palettes is simply, say, just enter a block into here, or let's say my chair block. I can select it, drag it over. Let's make it another one. I'll create a new palette. We can just simply grab our block reference and then just drag it over. It's the reason why it's not registering is I have to save it first. Then we can drag it over in, because it makes that connection of file directory of where this is located at and what block name it is. As long as we keep our block name the same, whenever we make any ongoing updates, everything kind of falls into place automatically, whether you create your tool palette coding or your CUI coding as well. So this concludes my block presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed this, and there was some new things that might have been covered and talked about that isn't covered in maybe a lot of other type of technical discussions. Thank you, guys.